In this video, we're going to have a look at SPSS, so the statistical software you'll be using for the rest of the day. And again, you'll be able to use this in your ClinDoc projects if you like SPSS. There are other software packages available though. We've got an example data set that I've created. This actually does come from real data, but it's been slightly manipulated just for the purposes of the exercises we're going to be doing. Basically, the research study that we've set up here is that we're interested in the relationship between marital status and health. We've collected data from a representative sample of the Scottish population. Now, when you use SPSS, this is essentially the screen that you're going to come up with when you open the data set. There's two different views, and we're going to look at both those views on this PowerPoint presentation. And then I'm going to open up SPSS as well, just to sort of show you around and kind of do a kind of live action kind of view of it, just so you can see how you navigate around. But this is what we call the data view window. And this is basically all your data set up. And it basically looks a bit like an Excel spreadsheet. That is pretty much what it is. The main difference you'll see between SPSS and Excel is, for example, your top row here, the sort of blue row that you sort of see across here that starts with ID 03 and goes across all these different variables. This in Excel would be one of your rows, whereas in SPSS it's kind of been excluded, and so it's not counted within your rows. So your rows start at 1, and that's where your data starts. So that's just one of the key differences you'll notice between SPSS and Excel if you're familiar with Excel. Now, there's lots of options built into SPSS, and a lot of them you'll never actually have to use. For what we are going to be doing today and the stages we're going through, you'll work through each of them in turn, and I've provided a lot of material in the exercises that demonstrates and details how you do all of the kind of things you're being asked to do. But, you know, as you kind of get more used to the software and as you explore things as part of your research projects, you will obviously use certain things that we're not going to touch on today. And so don't get too overwhelmed with all the things that you potentially could do with it. We're going to go through what the main things are that we want you to look at this moment in time. So in the data view, you'll notice that each of what we call your variables, so each of your measures are in the columns, and each of your individuals are in the rows. And that's what you can basically see here. You've got a variable here called ID03, which is essentially a unique identifier for each individual in the data set. And then you've got all these different measures that we've included. And when we look at the real data set, you'll be able to see what these are. So this is kind of the main view that you get when you're in SPSS, but there's also another thing called the variable view. So if you look at the bottom left of this screen grab here, you've got this little tab that says variable view. Now this is basically the exact same again as what you might have in Excel, where you've got your different tabs. In SPSS, you've only got these two that swaps between the two different kind of viewpoints. So if you were to click that variable view button, which we'll do in time, this will take you to what I've classified here as the code book. This is basically all the information that goes in the background that you don't see in the other view that tells you something about that variable and those measures that you've got. You've got lots of different kind of characteristics in here within your variable view, and we'll look through them in turn. I've provided just a quick definition here of what we class as a variable. I use it a lot, sometimes forgetting to explain what it is. So it's an object, an event, an idea, a feeling, could be a time period, or any other type of category that you're trying to measure, essentially. So it's a measure, it's a factor, it's whatever you're kind of looking at in your data. Again, typically we have lots of different variables in our data sets, and we can construct them in different ways to suit our needs, to suit how we ask those questions in the survey, how people will answer them in a survey, or again, you know, any other kind of data collection tools we have, like medical records and census data collection. And again, we can modify and tweak them to suit our needs. And sometimes we'll find that we actually have to clean some of the data up, whether that's data we create ourselves or that's data we get from another source. There's certain things we might have to do to make it work specifically for us. And in each of these kind of now columns in the variable view, you'll see here you've got your variable names again. So these were what were in that sort of top header row in the previous view. You've got here what's called type. Now this basically just tells you what is the type of variable that you've got. And you can have different kind of variations of that. So it can be numeric, it can be string text, for example. So lots of different kind of categories, but typically they'll be numeric because that's what you're going to use in your quantitative analysis. You have a couple of columns here, width and decimals. They don't really do a lot of things that are going to be that different for you. You can just slightly modify them if you have certain numbers or certain categories in your variable list that have width just shows you how much you can see of that in your data view, and the decimals is obviously the decimal places that you can have in your data. Probably the most important one is the label column. And this is basically where you can put in a description of what your variable is. Because in the name column, you can only basically put in, people typically put in a short code for what their variable is going to be. So you've got sex or age. But again, you've got some ones that look a little bit stranger than that. And part of the reason for this is that you can't have any spaces in your name for your variables. It just has to be one long string of text. And again, it can be a very complex thing. People don't want to have a whole big complex term for it. So you put that information in the label column. So here you can go into a lot more depth, a lot more detail about what it is that you've got in your categories in your variable there. There's also a column called values, which is where you can set particular numerical values and what they mean. So if you've got things like, you've asked a question and you've got 5 different categories, from whether they strongly agree to strongly disagree. In the values box, you can tell SPSS what those values mean, because all it sees are a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is that you're using. It doesn't know what they mean, but in values, you can tell those categories. You can say, well, 1 means that you strongly disagree, 5 means that you strongly agree, and you obviously can fill in all those in between those points. The next column is missing, where again you have the same ability to tell SPSS what that data looks like, and if it's important in this case is that certain data might be missing. This is much more likely if you've got a survey, for example, that you've created and people answer questions but then they miss one of them out. They don't answer, say, a question on income, which is commonly something that people don't reveal in surveys. So you can have lots of missing data in that, and you can tell SPSS, well, the value I'm giving it here, you can see on the screen, it mentions -1. So in this data set, they gave a value of -1 to indicate that we have a missing data there. Sometimes you can leave it out and the SPSS will deal with it too, but some people like to notify SPSS of what it's going to be before they carry out their analysis, just to make sure everything's tidied up and everything's the way they want it to be. The other columns don't really kind of matter that much. It's more about how you can view things, so you can see things on the screen. The other one that is probably relevant is the measure column. And this is where you can tell SPSS what the data looks like, if it's scale data, if it's nominal data or ordinal data. And we're going to look at this in more detail in the next presentation when we're going to look at types of data that you can use. But what you set the category here is determines, when you use some of the menus, what types of stats tests you can run, because certain kind of tests you can't use on what we call nominal data. Other tests, again, you can't really use on scale data. So we have to kind of know what the variables look like in this description. And this is just all this information that SPSS processes in the background in terms of the types of tests that you can run with it. So basically in this slide, everything I've talked through in the previous slide, this is all just set out here. It's more if you're downloading the slides and downloading the handouts, so that you've got a record of that if you want to refer back to it without having to rewatch the video or check where you've been in the clip, for example. So now it's your turn. Let's have a look at SPSS, have a look at the data set that we've created for the exercises and for these lecture materials. So you should have already requested, downloaded, and installed SPSS for your computer. If not, do this before continuing. This will probably mean that you have to work through your lectures without doing the exercises because you need the data to do that. So if you're watching these in advance of the 22nd of October, try and get your data sorted as soon as you can and get access to SPSS. If you do have access to the software, download the file that's in this Canvas page and some instructions. When you open SPSS, go to File, Open Data, and then find wherever you saved that data set, and that will open it up for you.